now from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede and welcome to Facing South Florida. This is our first show back in the new year, and 2020 is shaping up to be an extraordinary time. As we have seen in the last few weeks alone, there is no shortage of major stories with local connections. But one of the things we want to continue doing is shine a light on stories that aren't getting the coverage they deserve. This morning we will turn our attention to one of them. Carnival is the largest cruise ship company in the world. It's based just down the street here in Doral. Its owner is Mickey Harrison. Forbes magazine estimates he is worth more than $8 billion and is the 59th richest man in the world. He also owns the Miami Heat. In April 2017, Carnival pleaded guilty to federal criminal charges that it knowingly and willfully entered into a conspiracy deliberately to pollute the waters around the United States, and further, that it engaged in efforts to cover up those crimes from the Coast Guard and other agencies. Carnival agreed to pay a $40 million fine and was placed on probation for 5 years. But earlier this year, in the midst of that probation, Carnival continued to pollute the waters, and the company had to plead guilty to violating its probation and pay an additional $20 million fine. On Wednesday, Carnival was back before a federal judge who continued to express frustration the company was not doing more to clean up its act. Joining me now to delve a little deeper into this story is Taylor Dolven, a business writer with the Miami Herald, who has been doing an excellent job covering this story in federal court. Taylor, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Anything I said in the open that I got wrong? Was that pretty much a recitation of facts correctly?
I think you covered it well.
Okay, so I want to go back to the beginning. This case was initially filed by the Department of Justice against Carnival in 2016, and it really starts with one ship in particular and one cruise line in particular under Carnival's umbrella, Princess Cruise Lines. As I understand it, Princess, that one of their ships was found to be sort of discharging bilge water and oily water into the oceans around the United States. That's where this case starts?
Yeah, this case starts back in 2016 is when Carnival Corporation pleaded guilty. Like you said, several of its Princess Cruises ships were discharging oily waste into the ocean and covering up those crimes over a period of actually 8 years. And the case was spurred by a British engineer on one of the ships who served as a whistleblower and raised the alarm about this to authorities, including the Coast Guard.
And one of the things that I found fascinating about that, so let's go back to that original guilty plea. What Carnival admitted in court to doing was that among the things that the government charges that they admitted to was after suspecting that authorities had been informed that senior ship engineers were dismantling the bypass pipe. In other words, we're going around the system designed to prevent it, that they had worked their way around that system. They then instructed the crew to lie to regulators if anyone came on board to ask about it. Even more, that as the inquiry continued, that they actually held sham meetings on board some of the ships. And knowing that their conversations were being monitored by LA, were doing basically bogus conversations about how they were doing the right things while holding up a sign saying, LA is listening. So, I mean, this wasn't just sort of like an accidental discharge. This was willful, deliberate, and worse than that, after being caught, engaged in conspiracy to try to cover it up. Correct?
That's exactly right, and I think that's the exact reason that the Department of Justice decided to get involved here. This wasn't a mistake. This was a, as you say, a willful violation of the law, U.S. law and international law.
So now Carnival is on probation for the past few years, but as part of that probation, as I understand it, there's a monitoring program. There's a court monitor. There's a third-party auditor. In other words, steps are being tried to put in place to make sure these things don't happen again. Correct?
Yes, and actually part of the original 2016 plea agreement that you mentioned includes in it that the company agreed not to violate any environmental laws, whether they be international, federal, state, or local, for the duration of the 5-year period.
And as part of their agreement in 2016 that they pled guilty to in 2017, they paid a $40 million fine. Mm-hmm. And again, we should sort of point out, Carnival is a very, very profitable company. Estimates are that they earn in profit $3 billion a year.
Yes, that's true for 2018.
So $40 million for an 8-year period of polluting isn't really, even though it's the largest fine of its kind ever levied by the federal government, from Carnival's standpoint, not a huge, hit to their bottom line.
Yeah, and concerns have been raised about whether that amount really can be a deterrent for a company that like you said, made over $3 billion in profits in 2018.
All right. So now Carnival's on notice. They've been caught. They've pled guilty. They've agreed to pay a fine. There's all these sanctions put in place to try to regulate them, to monitor them, and yet they continue to do bad things. What happened during the course of their probation that they got caught again on?
Yeah, it's important to note that they did not commit the same crimes that they were convicted of in 2016. So as to say, all of the violations that have happened since they originally pleaded guilty have been unintentional. That being said, they have continued to violate environmental laws over the course of their first 3 years of probation, and it got to a point where in April of last year, the judge in this case, federal judge Patricia Seitz, started to raise concerns about whether they were taking this seriously and decided to move forward with revoking their probation. And that was for a few things. They had dumped plastic into Bahamian waters. Plastic discharges are taken most seriously when it comes to environmental crimes, along with oil. They had attempted to communicate with the Coast Guard through a back channel to sort of talk about the case. They had been sending crews out to ships prior to visits from the court-appointed monitor to try and clean them up.
I want to stop there for a second, because this is the most fascinating thing and shows me more of a cultural issue, what you just sort of highlighted there. So one of the things that the court put in place was that there would be monitors sent on board ships to see if the ships were behaving correctly. Well, of course, a monitor doesn't just show up on a ship. They coordinate with the cruise line. They say, okay, on this day, we're going to be going out and sending our monitors on board this cruise ship. We'll be arriving on this day. And what Carnival was doing, in violation of the agreement, was sending out a crew in advance of that to sort of tidy things up. Well, in this case, they clean up all the bad things, and then when the monitor comes, they don't realize it. And so they were circumventing the law, or circumventing the judge's order, by cleaning things up in advance, correct?
Yes, correct. They from their perspective at the time, they were trying to sort of put their best foot forward and really wanted to do well on these assessments. But
that's right. They wanted to not get caught again.
Right, and the judge's biggest issue was that it showed the company wasn't taking seriously the assessment process and wasn't open to learning from the mistakes it was making. If you have an assessment that isn't reality, doesn't reflect the reality of the ship, how can you improve?
Well, and what's even more striking for the judge, as I understand it, is that after getting caught sending out these crews in advance on board the ships and being told not to do that anymore, they then did it again.
Yes, they continue to do it.
And that's what brought them into court on June 3rd, correct?
Yes.
So this past June 3rd, threatened with the possibility of having Carnival ships barred from entering U.S. ports, Carnival suddenly now takes this very seriously. And one of the things I noted in reading the transcript of that June 3rd hearing is, whereas before they had in-house counsel and civil litigators, I'm not sure if it was the first time, but certainly they brought with them a high-powered criminal defense attorney, which the judge noted, finally Carnival realizes these are criminal offenses that you're doing, and you need to take this more seriously.
Yes, and that hearing really marked a change in tone on this entire case. Before that, for most of the hearings, their attorneys got up and really defended them against the court-appointed monitor's assessments of their progress, and that really marked a total shift where they said, you're right, we need to do more. And charted a different path for them.
And at these hearings, one of the people who have been required to come, Judge Seitz has made clear she wants to see him in the courtroom every time, is Carnival founder's son, Mickey Arison. Ted Arison founded the company. Mickey Arison now owns the company. And Mickey Arison has had to sit in court and listen to this time and time again and be told he's ultimately responsible.
Yeah, the chairman, Mickey Arison, and the CEO, Arnold Donald, are both expected to be there and frequently answer questions about the progress.
So in reading all the documents that I've done and in reading your coverage, which is, as I said, has been excellent, what I walk away from is that the court-appointed monitors, the third-party auditors, the folks that the court have tried to put in place to look at the situation, have concluded that essentially the rank-and-file workers within Carnival do want to do the right thing. The problem is they're not getting the support from upper management to continue to do the right thing, to actually engage in some of those things. And one of the things was talked about is they had a compliance officer who had no authority to actually enforce any of the compliance issues.
Yeah, that was one of the probation violations explicitly, was you're not giving enough funding or power to the person in charge of compliance. And the court mandated that the company hire a high-level executive to be in charge of this, and they've since done that and brought him on, and he started in August.
And we should note Pete Anderson is that executive who's now the chief compliance officer, ethics officer for the company. We invited him to come on this show. We invited anyone that Carnival wanted to send to sit here and have this conversation with us. They declined to come today. They said they may make Pete Anderson available at another day. He is welcome to come in. We'd like to hear what Carnival has to say. Essentially, they sent me a statement saying that they take this very seriously, that they're committed to leaving places better than when they arrive, that they want to do good by the environment, but they're going against a history that is showing otherwise. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, the court had a survey done of Carnival employees. What did that survey find?
So this survey interviewed thousands of employees at the end of 2018 and was delivered to the company in August, and it found a pervasive blame culture where lower-level employees are discouraged from raising concerns, are not heard, don't feel that they're heard, and feel that if they come forward about a mistake or an error they make, they'll be blamed for it and disciplined, instead of sort of trusting a larger system that will support them and figure out what's going wrong and fix things really systemically. So that's something the judge has continued to point to as an underlying problem here.
And I think that it's clear that Judge Seitz's goal here is not to cripple the company, not to harm the company itself or endanger workforce. I mean, Carnival is a major employer here in South Florida. She just wants Carnival to do the right thing by the environment. As she has pointed out several times, Carnival makes its fortunes by using the environment, by using the oceans to profit. They should be leaving them better than they find them.
Yeah, she said something really interesting at this week's hearing, which was that the company, in her perception, the company thinks of itself as a hospitality company that provides vacations, and that those vacations happen to happen on the ocean. And she really wants them to get to a point where they think of themselves as a marine operation, first off, that provides vacations second. And so she's waiting to see that shift, is what she said.
Well, she also, addressing Mickey Harrison, said to him, I think I want you to become an environmentalist, essentially. And he said, yeah, oh, I am, Your Honor. And he cited that they've given money to the Bahamas, to other places. But that idea of truly being committed to it is the central question that we're still waiting to find out, because one of the things that prosecutors have said is that Carnival is very sensitive to its image. It wants to be perceived as doing the right thing, but more important, it has to actually do the right thing. And that's what we're waiting to see.
Yeah, and it's important to note, I mean, they have expanded the team of people investigating these incidents. They've doubled the budget of the compliance office. They've put out a podcast where the CEO talks about the importance of this, bi-weekly. They're doing a lot of things, but as the judge repeatedly says, the proof is in the pudding, and the company continues to pollute the environment while they're on probation and under this microscope.
And one of the things that's interesting is, as part of this probation, the judge has very smartly been able to expand the reach to force Carnival not only to report issues around the United States, but around the world.
Well, right, and it's important to note Carnival Corporation is, as you said, the biggest cruise company in the world. They have over 100 ships operating all over the world on 9 different cruise lines. And the original crimes happen on just one of those cruise lines, Princess Cruises, and they're now, we can see what's happening any given day on any of their ships all over the world. So this is really an unprecedented look at environmental operations in the cruise industry.
And again, I'll make a last point. Carnival is not alone. Other cruise lines have faced these same issues, but I think one of the things the judge has said is that those other cruise lines have sort of outpaced Carnival in taking corrective actions and trying to change the culture within. Ultimately, it is an issue of culture, and that comes from Mickey Harrison.
Yeah, it's difficult to know what the operation looks like at Royal Caribbean, at Norwegian Cruise Line. We don't have an under-the-hood look like we do at Carnival. So I'd certainly be interested to see the same information for those 2 cruise lines.
Taylor, there's a story, like I said, that we're going to continue to follow. I think the reason it hasn't gotten more attention is because there are no cameras in a federal courtroom, so we don't get to hear the judge, the prosecutor, others lay out their case against Carnival. You've done it very well in the Herald. We will try to continue to do it here. We hope to have you back.
I appreciate that.
All right. Up next, the race for state attorney in Miami-Dade County just got a little more interesting. I'll tell you why when we come back.